There are now bipartisan efforts to improve the ACA in both the House and the Senate. Senator Nelson is working with Republican Senator Susan Collins of Maine to fix parts of the ACA that have not been working. In the House, Republican Tom Reed of New York and Democrat Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey lead the Problem Solvers Caucus of about 40 House members who are about evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats. That caucus includes a healthcare working group that has also been meeting to find a bipartisan solution to problems with the ACA. Representative Webster, we do not need partisan stunts like Republican Senator Steve Daines' attempt to trap Democrats in a single-payer proposal designed to fail. The Democrats saw through that ruse. We need bipartisan working groups like that of Nelson and Collins in the Senate and that of the Problem Solvers Caucus in the House. Would you be willing to join the Problem Solvers Caucus and work honestly and in good faith with your colleagues in both parties to serve the American people and to resist being taken in by false promises as what had happened with your changed vote in the AHCA?
You know, why are there budget cuts in certain areas? Why are we taking money? Now, I do want to explain this. Medicaid has not changed at all in this state since before Obamacare, during Obamacare, after Obamacare, if that happens. It has not changed.
Let's see about that. Webster said Medicaid has not changed in Florida since before the Affordable Care Act, what he calls Obamacare. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation, Medicaid CHIP enrollment in Florida numbered 3,695,306 prior to the Affordable Care Act. Enrollment increased 18% from pre-ACA to post-ACA. In other words, yes, Medicaid coverage in Florida has changed. It has increased by 18%. What Webster said is false. What Webster said next is just odd. Listen.
People say, oh, I wanted to be on Medicaid, now I can't be. No, it's never changed. That was, the court ruled it unconstitutional. So the people that want to have Medicare as the offering to all the people, that's unconstitutional. The United States Supreme Court just a couple of years ago ruled that you cannot demand that the states pick up the Medicaid. That was demanded in Obamacare, that there be an expansion of Medicaid. That was denied by the Supreme Court. It had to be state by state. Our state legislature has not expanded Medicare. So please, you know, just those know that Medicare has not changed and maybe won't ever here in this state.
Make up your mind, Congressman. Is it Medicaid or Medicare? You can't even get your terms straight. These excerpts are from Webster's May 8, 2017 newsletter. He wrote, quote, "Since the American Health Care Act was proposed, I have been very concerned about Florida's Medicaid-funded nursing home beds. These are critical to the access some of our senior population has to our nursing homes. From the beginning and at every step, I voiced my concerns and made it clear a solution to this problem was integral to my support." Unquote. If Webster insists that Medicaid numbers don't change, then why was he so concerned about them when Trump Care was up for a vote in the House? Note that in his newsletter he writes about getting reassurances from Trump, Pence, and the House, namely the GOP leadership. Looks like whoever reassured Webster took him for a fool. Either that or he himself was making false promises. Webster changed his vote from no to yes on Trump Care after being told that changes would be made to protect Medicaid beds in Florida nursing homes. Writes Christopher Heath at WFTV9, "It appears those changes haven't been made. The 142 pages of the Senate version of the AHCA does not appear to show the solution Webster was promised." I have addressed other issues in Webster's May 8th newsletter. You can read my letter to the Citrus County Chronicle online. But let's return to what Webster was telling us during his August 10th listening session.
Here's the problem with Medicaid. It's the base. States who started with a low base and then got more, grew, are punished. And that's and I'll go through that a little bit, but just I'll give you one example. We cover 1 million more people than the state of New York. So somebody was asking about why is New York and these bipartisan New Yorkers siding with Democrats, is because it's for their own life in a sense. They cover 1 million less and they get twice the Medicaid dollars as Florida gets. And that's what I've been trying to change. The Senate, I'm working with the Senate in there to do that. And it's just, so there's the disagreement.
That 1 million more than New York? False. Let's break this down. Let's return to these data from the Kaiser Family Foundation. Look at the numbers. Total monthly Medicaid CHIP enrollment in May 2017 in Florida was 4,348,786. In New York, it was 6,433,031. Webster said New York covers 1 million fewer people than Florida, when in fact, New York covers 2 million people more than Florida does. Webster goes on to complain that New York gets more federal dollars than Florida does. He's talking mainly about Medicaid, but remember, we have now established that New York covers 2 million people more than Florida does. If you want to be exact, New York covered 2,084,245 more people than Florida did in May 2017, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation. Let's compare the federal assistance received for each of the two states. Let's also compare what they receive from the government in return for what they provide to the government in taxes. But first, let's just let Webster talk.
There are the haves that, not under Obamacare, but even before Obamacare, they're getting huge amounts because their base started high and it continued to escalate. Ours started low and grew exponentially, and we never caught up. And we won't. We won't before, we won't during, and we won't after unless something happens, and I'm working with that. And I've got enough votes to stop any bill that doesn't give us a balance of an even base, just like New York is. You're going to have every New Yorker, Republican and Democrat, against that. But it's not right for us to cover 1 million more people, because it's a shared program.
Note how he keeps insisting that Florida covers 1 million more people than New York does. Again, refer back to the numbers from the Kaiser Family Foundation.
So you know what happens? We are required to match. 55-45. That's why we're concerned about it, because it's our state budget, it's our education system, it's our other things that are provided by the state government through the legislature. Those all, if the federal government makes us match money that they are not going to give to us, and we have to do it at a much higher rate than all the other big states, it's going to be tough on us.
Now let's take a look at the federal money given to Florida versus New York, and let's compare that with the taxes both states pay into the government. This is the overview of the Pew Charitable Trust's analysis of federal spending in the states from 2005 through 2014. Federal dollars come to the states in 5 forms outlined in the overview. Those 5 forms are retirement benefits, non-retirement benefits, grants, contracts for the purchases of goods and services, and salaries and wages for federal employees. This is a spreadsheet from the Pew Charitable Trusts showing federal spending data by state during the years 2005 through 2014. You'll notice that the cover page has the source materials, the methodology, a link to that, notes, contact information, and the 2016 copyright from the Pew Charitable Trusts. Here are the data. This is a screen grab of the spreadsheet. I'm going to pull out the federal spending in both Florida and New York for fiscal year 2014. For all the data that I'm presenting here, 2014 was the most recent year in which I could call forth all of this data so that we could compare them all across the same year. Then I will pull the total tax collections for both states. That data will come directly from the Internal Revenue Service data book for fiscal year 2014. I have pulled from the spreadsheet the federal dollar amounts spent in Florida and New York in each of the 5 categories covered in the Pew Charitable Trust's analysis. Remember that Webster complained New York gets more federal dollars than Florida does. Quoting from him, if the federal government makes us match money that they are not going to give to us, and we have to do it at a much higher rate than all the other big states, and so on. If you look at all the federal dollars spent in both states during fiscal year 2014, you see that Florida received 1/3% more in federal funding than New York did. New York did receive considerably more in grants, which includes Medicaid grants. But remember that according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, and contrary to what Webster said, New York covers over 2 million more Medicaid recipients than Florida does. Now, 1/3% doesn't sound like much, but let's now compare the states in terms of what they give to the government. This is the cover of the fiscal year 2014 data book published by the Internal Revenue Service. And I've given a web address where you can read the whole thing online. It's pretty big. Table 5, Gross Collections by Type of Tax and State, fiscal year 2014, appears on pages 12 through 14. Page 12 has the data that we are looking for, the total amount of tax revenues delivered from the states to the government. Using that table, we can compare Florida and New York to see which state gives more money to the government and how much more. Money amounts are in thousands of dollars. If you look at the upper left, I've boxed in red the notice. Florida and New York's numbers are boxed in red. Total internal revenue collections from Florida for fiscal year 2014 were $154,353,070,000. Total internal revenue collections from New York for fiscal year 2014 were $250,618,177,000. So to recap, numbers from the Pew Charitable Trusts show that Florida received 1/3% more federal dollars than New York did. But Florida paid only 62% of the federal taxes paid by New York. So Florida paid more than 1/3 less in taxes than New York did, but got more federal funding. Webster argued that Florida is being penalized when, in fact, it is the other way around. Let's look into this a bit further. In January 2017, Morgan Scarboro at the Tax Foundation examined which states rely most on federal aid. Her article includes a map showing where each state stands. Federal aid comprised 33.2% of Florida's general revenue for fiscal year 2014. Federal aid comprised 32.8% of New York's general revenue for fiscal year 2014. In other words, federal aid comprised 0.4%, so slightly less than 0.5%, more of Florida's general revenue than it did of New York's. Florida is therefore more dependent on federal aid than New York is. The difference is not that great when you look at the range across states, which ranges from 16.8% for North Dakota up to 40.9% for Mississippi. But it shows that Webster's complaint that Florida is penalized more than New York is completely false. Which brings us back to Webster's argument against joining the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus. He complained that New York gets more federal benefits compared to Florida, making the Republicans there more bipartisan. As we have seen, the facts beg to differ. Also, members of the caucus hail from almost 20 different states. But there is one other detail that Webster neglected to mention. 2 Florida Republican House members, Carlos Curbelo and Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, are already members of the Problem Solvers Caucus, along with Florida Democrats Charlie Crist, Stephanie Murphy, and Darren Soto. So, why won't Webster join them? Unfortunately, I couldn't ask Webster, because once his constituents have spoken, he gets to have the last word and give his talking points, regardless of how well they adhere to fact. Here's how he explains and justifies his listening session format.
I have listening sessions, that's what I call them. I don't call them town halls. I do listening sessions, I've done it for years. I was in the state legislature, House, Senate, did them there too. And so I let everybody who's here, I'm just going to go down the road, and if you don't want to say anything, you don't have to. If you want to make a comment, you can. If you want to ask a question, you can. And then at the end, that's when I'll answer the questions, make my comments, and also tell you a little bit about our constituent services. So that's the way I like to do it. Then I get to hear everybody. These town halls, they get 2 or 3 people dominate, and they just get the floor, and then they just keep talking. So to get through everybody, you can't, don't give a big long speech. It'll get said, I promise you. With this size, you're going to get most of the things said. So try to keep your comments so that everybody gets a chance that wants to talk. You don't have to, but if you want to, you can. And then if you want to ask a question, you can do that too. But I'm going to sit right there. I'm going to listen. That's what it is, listening session. And then when we're done, I'll talk. We'll try to answer some of the questions, and we'll see what happens.
In other words, this listening session format leaves no chance to ask for clarification or to question anything Webster has said after we have all gotten the chance to speak. He gets the last word, and he can say whatever he wants. He can cherry-pick what questions to respond to. Another control tactic is to give constituents almost no advance notice of these listening sessions. The email to me from Webster's office was dated Monday, August 7th, 2017 at 3:54 p.m. for an event scheduled for August 10th, 2017, beginning at 10 a.m. In other words, I received the invitation less than 72 hours prior to the event. Many constituents are at their jobs when these listening sessions are held and cannot get time off, especially when given less than 72 hours notice in which to inform their employer. Asking for that time off with such little advance notice can violate company policies. For example, drawing from its review of company policy statements, the Jacksonville, Florida Chamber of Commerce states, quote, "Requests for personal holidays must be made in writing not less than 10 days in advance of the requested date." Webster therefore discounts a segment of his constituency that cannot take time off from work, people who have issues that are not being addressed. Of course this format works for him. 1. By giving little advance notice, he limits attendees to people who can afford to attend the event without adverse impact on their livelihoods. 2. By speaking last and cherry-picking which comments to address, he can ignore constituent input. Furthermore, he gives constituents no chance to respond to his statements. 3. He effectively turns his listening session into a stump speech. Representative Webster, you took an oath to serve all of your constituents. What will you do to enable more of your constituents to attend your events and in a way that we can engage with you in a meaningful manner with a chance to respond to your talking points?